Welcome back to the podcast.
We have a great show for you today.
Welcome to the debate. So, picture this. You are sitting in a massive conference room,
Oh no, I already hate where this is going.
right? You have the entire project completely mapped out in your head. Flawless expertise. But then, the senior vice president turns to you, the whole room goes dead silent, and they ask, "So, what is your take?"
And your brain just entirely unplugs itself. Just a total dial-up tone.
Exactly. Your heart rate spikes, your authority just evaporates, and you start filling that awful silence with, apologies, rambling caveats, and constant ums. Today, we are dissecting that exact moment when your communication completely breaks down under pressure. How do you reclaim your credibility?
Yeah, it is the ultimate question. Are we looking at a failure of our internal psychology? Or is it, fundamentally a failure of our external mechanics?
Well, I will be arguing that true communicative power is an inside-out process. It relies entirely on internal regulation and cognitive alignment well before you even open your mouth.
And I will take the exact opposite stance. Confidence is an outside-in discipline. It is engineered through external behavioral mechanics and structural constraints, regardless of whatever internal panic you happen to be feeling at the time.
Okay, so to really understand this, we have to look at what is actually happening in the mind during those high-pressure blank brain moments.
The literal worst moments of my professional life, to be honest.
We have all been there. But a lack of confidence in speaking rarely stems from a sudden mysterious loss of vocabulary. It stems from disorganized thoughts.
That feeling that you suddenly know absolutely nothing.
Right. Let's introduce a metaphor here to make it clear. I like to conceptualize the anxious brain in these moments as a remarkably messy drawer.
A messy drawer.
Yeah, imagine a drawer in your kitchen filled to the brim with tangled cables, old chargers, and random mystery objects. Those cables represent your data points, your past experiences, your anxieties about the meeting, and your half-formed ideas.
Oh, I have that exact drawer in my house right now.
Everyone does. And if you simply reach in blindly and pull a cable at random because you feel pressured to speak immediately, well, everything comes out in one massive, unusable knot.
Because you are pulling the panic right alongside the expertise.
That is precisely it. That knot is what happens when speech precedes internal organization. You literally hear people talking in circles because they are using their vocal cords to figure out what they want to say in real time.
Yeah, thinking out loud, but in a bad way.
Let's define a key concept here: alignment. True confidence requires alignment. It is a state where your thoughts, your emotions, and your convictions are all placed on the same team. When a speaker takes the time to internally organize that drawer, finding that single clear thread of their argument, they can hold their ground organically. The external delivery is merely a byproduct of this internal clarity.
Look, the messy drawer is a fantastic image, but it assumes we always have the luxury of time to organize before we speak.
Well, not necessarily.
But in the real world, the CEO is staring at you right now. You do not have time to sort your cables. That is why I would argue the immediate lever isn't psychological at all. It is mechanical.
So you think you can just bypass the internal chaos completely?
I think you absolutely have to. Confidence is an external projection achieved through specific deliberate habits. Consider a dynamic we see in offices every day, right? You have the brilliant individual with the messy internal drawer who struggles to get a point across.
Sure.
But in that same meeting, another colleague speaks up. This colleague might actually have way less technical expertise, simpler vocabulary, and no doubt they experience their own internal imposter syndrome. Yet they command the room entirely. Why is that?
Because they are not secretly afraid of judgment.
No, I do not buy that. It is because of their external cues. They utilize steady pacing. They use deliberate pauses. They completely abstain from nervous, self-deprecating jokes.
Okay, I see your point.
They project this undeniable impression of credibility
built entirely through the structural conciseness of their sentences and their physical stillness. They are not achieving some monk-like inner peace before they open their mouths. They are utilizing external mechanics to project authority. The audience does not see your internal messy drawer. They only see your external habits.
The audience might not see the drawer, but they absolutely hear the motivation behind your words. If we want to fix a communication breakdown, we have to look at why those external habits fail when they aren't rooted in psychology.
I am listening.
In high-stakes environments, the speaker's primary objective unconsciously shifts. You walk into the room thinking, I need to share this vital information. But the moment the spotlight hits you, your brain pivots to, please like me, or please do not judge me.
Ah, the classic approval trap.
Right. And I know I have been guilty of this please like me reflex. I will start a perfectly good, well-researched point with, this might be a stupid question, but, or maybe I'm wrong, but, just to protect my ego.
Yeah, preemptive defense.
Exactly. Because the goal is approval rather than clarity, we preemptively weaken our own message. We introduce apologetic filler to soften the blow. If the root cause is this deep psychological fear of judgment, the solution has to be psychological. You have to shift your internal intent back to respect for your own voice, rather than prioritizing the approval of the room. You can't just slap a mechanical fix over a psychological wound.
I have to push back hard on that. I really do. Isn't the please like me reflex just a symptom of a lack of structural constraint?
How so?
You do not have time to psychoanalyze your deep-seated need for approval when a client is waiting for an answer. The cure for that psychological panic is actually a mechanical habit. Instead of trying to feel less intimidated, which is nearly impossible in the moment, you apply a strict structural rule, the deliberate 1-second pause.
A 1-second pause does not magically erase the fear of judgment?
It does not need to. By forcing a strict 1-second pause and committing to a single short sentence, you are artificially restricting your brain's available bandwidth. You physically do not give your mouth the runway required to ramble or apologize. You mandate brevity.
So you are basically putting yourself in a verbal straitjacket.
Exactly. The structural habit cures the psychological panic by giving the brain a narrow, manageable behavioral corridor to walk down. The mistake we make is thinking confidence is an emotion. It is not. In a boardroom, confidence is a geometry. It is the physical structure of your sentences.
That 1-second pause is valuable, yes. But what is happening during that second? It is not just a mechanical cessation of noise. It is the mind organizing the messy drawer.
I disagree.
But if you just pause mechanically and your internal state is still screaming, please don't judge me, your subsequent sentence will still carry the frequency of fear. Your micro-expressions are going to give you away no matter how concise your sentence is.
Well, I disagree that the audience is perceiving a frequency of fear if the mechanics are executed properly. Let's expand on the power of the body and the voice, because this is where the external argument really proves its worth. Communication is a multimodal projection.
Let's pause for a key concept definition there. Multimodal projection?
Yeah, it means your audience is not just listening to the transcript of your words. They are simultaneously reading your posture, your breathing, the tension in your jaw, and the pitch of your voice.
Multiple modes of data at once.
Right. If your words are perfectly structured to say, I am confident in this strategy, but your shoulders are hunched up toward your ears screaming, please do not look at me, the audience will believe your shoulders. Human beings are evolutionarily wired to trust physical, nonverbal cues over spoken language every single time.
I agree with the evolutionary biology, but forcing posture is dangerous territory.
It is not forcing posture. It is adopting tiny, deliberate physical habits. It is stopping the continuous fidgeting. It is letting your voice carry the sentence all the way to the final syllable.
Carrying the sentence?
Yes, so many people start a sentence with strong volume, but as they reach the end of their thought, their breath support drops off. Their voice fades out into this quiet, apologizing tone that leaves a never-mind feeling hovering in the air.
Oh, I hear that all the time.
Right. If you just train the mechanical habit of carrying the vocal resonance to the final period, you project absolute credibility. You do not need to fix your imposter syndrome. You just need to finish your sentences with the same volume you started them with.
But relying entirely on physical manipulation runs a severe risk of inauthenticity. If we only focus on freezing the body and artificially sustaining vocal volume, aren't we just building a facade?
A facade that works.
A facade that shatters under pressure. If you force your shoulders down and lock your hands to the table while your internal state is in free fall, you do not look confident. You look like a hostage.
A hostage?
Yes, you look frozen, like a statue, and a statue is brittle. The moment someone pushes back on your idea, a statue tips over and breaks. True stillness, the kind that actually commands a room, is not about being frozen. It is about being grounded.
Okay, what is the practical difference between being frozen and being grounded?
Let's use another metaphor. I prefer the image of a tree with deep roots. The wind, which represents the pressure of the room, the intimidating peers, the difficult questions, can move the leaves and sway the branches. That is natural flexibility.
Okay, I follow.
You can nod, you can shift, you can react organically. But the tree itself stays in place because the root system is deep. Those roots are your internal conviction and your psychological alignment. When you are deeply rooted in the belief that your perspective holds value, your body naturally finds a relaxed, dynamic stillness. You hold your ground organically.
And without the roots?
Without that internal grounding, the performance falls flat the moment someone challenges you.
That is a beautiful metaphor. It really is. But have you considered how often people with incredibly deep roots still fail to communicate effectively because they lack the external mechanics to translate it?
If the roots are deep, the conviction should translate naturally.
But it doesn't always. I have seen brilliant experts who firmly believe in their data. They have incredible internal conviction, yet they fidget incessantly. They touch their hair, they shift in their chairs every 10 seconds, and they trail off at the ends of their sentences.
I see.
Their internal alignment is perfect, but their external mechanics act as a static interference. It scrambles the signal before it reaches the audience.
So you are saying the mechanics are necessary to broadcast the conviction.
Exactly. Being a deeply rooted tree sounds ideal, but if your external habits are constantly signaling discomfort, the audience will assume you lack conviction. The mechanics are the vehicle for the message. You can't just be grounded. You have to physically perform the signals of being grounded so the room can read them.
I concede that the physical delivery is the interface. But let's test this in the most extreme crucible, navigating high-pressure conflict.
Oh boy, the ultimate test.
Right. When someone actively disagrees with you, or the room becomes overtly hostile, your body's sympathetic nervous system activates. This is the classic fight-or-flight response.
The sweaty palms, the racing heart.
Yes. You feel that literal heat rising in your chest. You have the sudden, overwhelming urge to react defensively, to snap back, or to send a highly reactive, angry email.
We have all been there.
The brain completely abandons logic.
Yes, and in those moments, external mechanics completely disintegrate because the emotional brain has hijacked the system. You cannot remember to drop your shoulders or carry your sentence when you are flooded with adrenaline. The only way to survive that and maintain credibility is through internal regulation. Okay, how do you do that?
I conceptualize this as putting your emotions in the backseat of the car.
In the back seat, I like that. They aren't stuffed in the trunk.
Exactly. You can't shove them in the trunk or pretend they do not exist. They are allowed to be in the vehicle because you can't turn off your humanity, but they are absolutely not allowed to touch the steering wheel.
That makes sense.
Taking one slow, deliberate breath is a purely internal mechanism to reclaim intentionality from the reactive emotional brain. It creates a microspace where you can ask yourself, what do I actually want my words to achieve here? That internal inquiry shifts you from being reactive to being deliberate.
I agree that conflict is the ultimate test, and putting emotions in the backseat is crucial. But the solution is still an external adaptation to the environment. Even when emotions are in the backseat, you still have to know how to drive the car through that specific hostile terrain.
Which requires internal focus.
No, it requires the external skill of reading the room. Before you speak, you must empirically assess the external energy. Are the decision makers tired? Are they stressed out about a previous meeting? Are they looking for a fight, or are they desperately looking for a quick resolution?
Okay, so you gather external data. Then what?
Once you read that external data, you manage the conflict through strict structural conciseness. Think about what happens when people feel pressured in conflict. Their natural instinct is to over-explain. They beat around the bush.
They try to soften the blow.
Right, they hide their main point, their little gift of an idea, inside 15 different boxes of context, caveats, and apologies. By the time the listener finally unwraps the gift, they are exhausted and frustrated.
15 boxes is a lot to unwrap.
In conflict, the act of being strictly concise, delivering a single powerful paragraph instead of a meandering novel, is what actually asserts boundaries. It respects the listener's time. You manage the external environment by carefully controlling the structure and volume of your output, regardless of how fast your heart is beating.
But notice how your solution, being concise and not beating around the bush, requires the speaker to first possess the internal clarity to know exactly what that gift inside the boxes actually is.
Well, they already know what it is. They're just afraid to say it.
Not always. If the messy drawer hasn't been organized, the speaker literally cannot be concise because they are using their speech to figure out what they want to say. They are talking in circles because their thoughts are in circles. Internal alignment must precede external conciseness.
I don't know if I agree that you have to be perfectly aligned first.
When a speaker is truly composed, they aren't just deploying a clever tactic of brevity. They are reflecting an internal state of cognitive discipline. They have aligned their thoughts, emotions, words, body, and voice into a unified front. They aren't fighting themselves. That is why they come across as credible.
You make it sound like they have to achieve total enlightenment before they can speak in a meeting.
Not enlightenment, just alignment. They do not have to act like a completely different, hyper-assertive character, which, by the way, is exhausting and almost always reads as fake. They simply have to stand beside their own voice and trust their internal preparation.
I am not suggesting they act like a different character. I am suggesting that behavior shapes belief just as much as belief shapes behavior. This is a crucial physiological mechanism.
Walk me through that.
It is a biofeedback loop. By forcing yourself to speak in a single, clear paragraph, and by forcing yourself to maintain physical stillness, you actually send a biological signal back to your own brain. When you stop fidgeting and breathe deeply to support your sentence to the end, you stimulate the vagus nerve.
And that does what?
This literally lowers the cortisol levels in your brain.
So the body is tricking the brain into calming down.
It is not a trick, it is a physiological reality. The deliberate external action calms the internal chaos. You do not have to wait for total internal alignment to begin communicating effectively. You can build credibility sentence by sentence, habit by habit, from the outside in. By mastering the pacing, the volume, and the structural brevity, you create a container of competence.
A container of competence?
Yes. You build the external walls of confidence, the posture, the pause, the concise sentence. And often, the speaker steps into that container, begins speaking, and realizes, oh wow, I'm actually surviving this. The room is listening to me. The external discipline generates the internal confidence.
It seems we are approaching the core tension of our analysis here. While we prioritize different mechanisms, we have certainly illuminated the complexity of this issue. My stance remains that communication is fundamentally an inside-out process. It requires the internal alignment of disorganized thoughts, sorting that messy drawer, and the deliberate regulation of the emotional brain to truly hold one's ground.
The deep roots.
Exactly. Without putting our reactive emotions in the back seat, any external performance is a fragile facade, highly susceptible to collapse under real pressure.
And I maintain that confidence is an outside-in discipline. Mastering concise delivery, adopting the physical stillness that prevents static interference, and utilizing the mechanics of room reading are what build undeniable credibility. You project authority not by waiting for your internal doubts to magically vanish, but by ensuring your voice carries the sentence to the very end.
I think where we absolutely converge is on what confident communication is not. Both of our frameworks entirely reject the notion that credibility requires a naturally loud, dominant personality.
Absolutely. And it does not require the mastery of highly complex, convoluted vocabulary either. The colleague who commands the room with simple, precise grammar proves that every single day. It is entirely possible to project immense authority while speaking quietly, simply, and naturally, provided the mechanics or the alignment are firmly in place.
This shows us that confidence isn't some magical trait you are born with. It is a skill. It is a dual framework. It is how you organize the messy drawer in your head, and it is how you physically carry your words out into the room.
Which makes it highly actionable for anyone listening.
Yes, and speaking of actionable, let's wrap up with our word tour. We covered some powerful concepts today. We talked about multimodal projection, how people read your posture alongside your words.
We discussed the frequency of fear that creeps into our tone through apologetic filler.
We looked at the sympathetic nervous system hijacked during conflict.
And the incredible biofeedback loop where physical stillness actually lowers brain cortisol.
Examining the interplay between our inner composure and outer mechanics offers incredibly rich ground for anyone looking to master human interaction, which leaves us with a reflection challenge for you, the listener.
Are you ready for it?
The next time you find yourself freezing in a high-stakes room, the moment your brain goes blank and the silence stretches out, will you look inward to find your roots, or will you look outward to correct your posture?